The Treasury Minister has a lot on his plate at the moment as the impact of Trumpian economics sends shockwaves around the world. Despite the challenges, Alex Allinson appears unflappable, and he joins me in the studio. There's lots for us to discuss, including your proposed health levy, the budget, and the trade war provoked by Donald Trump. If we start with that, where does that leave Isle of Man government's finances?
So, as you said, I think most people knew what he said he was going to do. The question is whether he'd actually go through with it in terms of the widespread imposition of tariffs to all countries, friend or foe, and the effects that would have on the stock market and on the global economy. And we've yet to see, because this is moving so quickly. And also we've seen tariffs being announced one day and then reversed the next. I think there is that gut reaction from the markets, and we've certainly seen that last week in terms of quite rapid falls of 5-10% in certain markets, little bits of rebound, but we're living our lives through pronouncements on social media and press conferences in the middle of the night for our time, and then trying to digest that and see what the implications it will have. In the budget speech, I made the case that what we needed on the Isle of Man was certainty, particularly to inspire business confidence and consumer confidence to keep our economy going. And that's why we brought in a raft of measures to try to present that in terms of cutting the rate of income tax, as we said we would, not all the way down, but the first step, increasing personal allowances, increasing the thresholds for national insurance, increasing the thresholds for child benefit, increasing benefits. But it's very difficult to inspire confidence in people when they're turning on the news and seeing what can only be described as a bit of a chaotic scene around the world, and people trying to react to the implications of what is happening. I think it will take us probably a couple of weeks to figure out the exact implications of all of these, whether some of the tariffs are rolled back, whether there can be negotiations for trade agreements, and they're already being talked about. But in the short term, it's meant that there's been a correction of the stock markets. They've slumped all around the world. So when we look at our reserves and the actual day-to-day value of those, based on how much the shares and bonds are worth, that has gone down by probably around about 5%, in line with all the markets. Of course, that's not a loss of money. That's the overall value of it. But if we were to draw down on reserves, then we might crystallise some of that loss. And I think that was one of the main parts of the reaction to the budget, was the use of reserves, a real desire, both by Tynwald members and I think the general public, that we get our finances in order, that we live within our means as a government, but at the same time carry on providing the services that people want and expect, and in fact improve on them. And it's that balance, I suppose, about actually reducing government expenditure, or at least keeping it at bay, and not increasing government expenditure more than the income coming in, and certainly not increasing the overall spend more than the economic growth of the Isle of Man. But at the same time, putting money into health, putting money into education, putting money into border security. And that's the challenge that's been put to government and that we're facing in terms of the budget itself, but also all the productivity and efficiency drives that are going on now and being talked about and have been talked about in the past, particularly when you were in government.
We'll come to more detailed discussion of the budget shortly, but if we just perhaps finish off the Trump element of all this, are there any opportunities being identified? Because one of the things I imagine that can happen when there is so much instability is that potentially there are opportunities, particularly for jurisdictions like the Isle of Man, to benefit from the uncertainty that's out there.
I think there definitely will be. We've already had Philly McLeod from the creameries say that one of their big competitors in the US market are Irish cheeses. They've now got a 20% tariff. Isle of Man cheese have got 10% tariff. Is that an advantage when you're selling tons of cheese to large supermarket chains? Probably is. I suppose the problem when you look at wider parts of the economy is, are companies going to relocate to the Isle of Man with all this instability, or will a lot of them say, well, hang on a minute, I'll just wait for 6 months and see what happens in the end before making that plunge? I was at the opening of a new factory down south only recently, and one of the reasons that they'd moved to the Isle of Man was about the environment we have here, but also about tariffs. They were quite open about it. They'd switched manufacturing from China to England, and then when the business rates went up significantly in England, decided to relocate here and really invested in a new facility here. So I think those people with a long-term business plan are looking at the Isle of Man and saying, if we can go to a jurisdiction that's got stability, particularly in terms of taxation, in terms of security, which is very valuable, but in terms of the overall political structure, actually we will make that move. The issue is, as usual, making sure that we present ourselves as a well-run jurisdiction, well-regulated. We comply with all the major regulations, but we have the ability to offer something that other jurisdictions probably don't now. And I think that will be an advantage in the future. But at the same time, we've also got to protect what we've got and make sure that the businesses here and the local people are looked after.
So let's talk then about reserves, and particularly, I suppose, the gap between income and expenditure in government's accounts, which has been around for quite some time, and certainly goes back to 2008 when we learned of the alteration to the VAT revenue sharing arrangement with the UK. Over the course of the next, I suppose, I think it was about 8 years, that the deficit of 200 million, which was created by that change, was pulled down to about 75 million. Now that was with a very sort of stringent control over public finances. I think every single penny was squeezed out of public expenditure by the governments up to that time. I mean, the deficit now is more than it was back then. Now, yes, you've had COVID in the meantime, and that has caused significant problems. But COVID is now becoming a distant memory for people. How is it taking so long to at least recover to where we were 9 years ago in terms of that deficit?
There's been a whole range of challenges faced by the Isle of Man, and that's affecting local people and the government as well. You mentioned COVID, that set us back, and a large amount of time and effort was spent trying to prop up the local economy. We've managed to recover to a degree, but people are still bruised with that. We then had the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and if you cast your mind back, energy price freezes, extra benefits going to people to try to keep the economy afloat. We're now looking at investing in our communities, infrastructure investment, getting more businesses here, getting people back to work. But there is that hangover from the last couple of years. The previous administrations have cut services quite stringently. I'd probably advocate that DOI, when you were there, probably took the brunt of that. So a lot of what people call the low-lying fruit has gone already. But that comes at a cost. If you haven't got people employed to go and fix potholes, they stay empty. If you haven't got police officers looking after local neighbourhoods, you get crime. And so I think particularly the last administration and this administration in some ways had to catch up with that, with various initiatives around community policing, around putting money back into maintenance of government assets rather than just letting them rot. And that does cost money. And on top of that, I suppose one of the issues that's been highlighted is the overall government headcount and public sector pay. Because what we've seen, particularly the last 2 years, is trade unions, often based in the UK, talk about pay restoration, not just keeping up with inflation, but above inflation, to try to restore some of those cuts in their wages that were inflicted after the VAT recalculation. So there's been a range of issues. saying that's not an excuse, it's just an explanation. It is absolutely Treasury's job to get us back into a balanced budget. What we're doing is gradually reducing that budget deficit, gradually reducing the amount we're having to take out of reserves, while also trying to increase the interest we get from reserves. Obviously, with the instability in the markets at the moment, that's providing a bit of a challenge. But our 5-year financial plan shows us increasing the income for government, increasing the spending on key public services like education and health, while reducing the amount we draw down from reserves and actually growing those reserves as well. So this is an alchemy. It's just making sure we get the best return for the people's money that we've got in the bank, but also absolutely make sure that every pound spent has got value for money added to it. And that is going to be a challenge, because we've seen even recently when departments have looked at what they're providing and have started rationalising whether that's a bus route down to Cregneash, or whether it's a post box being emptied in Castletown, for two examples. People don't like that sort of change and react against it. But if we're going to be honest with people about reducing, or at least keeping in track public expenditure, we will need to make difficult decisions. And with an election next year, those difficult decisions possibly get harder to make by some politicians.
What hard decisions have been taken by this administration, would you say?
Yeah. I think some of them have been around benefits. Some of them have been around, tightening up the eligibility for benefits and trying to get as many people back to work as possible. When you look at some of the investments that we've made in terms of the economic strategy and setting up the economic strategy fund, and trying to make sure that we can increase the active working population and fill some of the skills gaps, that has come under quite a bit of criticism, but is exactly the right thing to do. We're constantly making changes to the investment structure in terms of how we get more money from our reserves in terms of interest. And obviously last year we put up income tax to meet a significant shortfall in funding for the NHS. So I think we have made those difficult decisions. Going forward, though, part of the operation and operation board mandate is very much to look at more efficiencies, to move towards digitalisation, whilst also making sure we bring people along with us. So, for instance, getting rid of my card, I've come under a lot of criticism for that. That will save us £500,000 a year, provide better service for people getting benefits. We will need, though, to deal with that small number of people who don't, for whatever reason, have a bank account. So I think we are making difficult decisions on a daily basis. Healthcare, as the biggest part of government expenditure now, it's even larger than benefits, has had to look at how they prioritise various services and be really realistic that some of the things that we wanted to bring in this year we'll possibly have to defer for next year or the year after. And also we need to have a real look at the way, or particularly we transfer people to the UK for treatments, and make sure that they're seen in the UK when only the UK can deal with them. That the rest of the time the care is treated and provided here.
And that is one of those bizarre things that I think many people would struggle to understand. I mean, why is it that follow-up appointments, which basically are pretty much along the lines of, well, how did the operation go? Are you okay? Why can those not be carried out in the Isle of Man?
They can, but what we need to do is look at reforming some of the processes in healthcare, because this isn't necessarily Manx Care's fault. This is something that they've inherited from the previous department structure. The reality is when people go to see a consultant at Nobles and they're judged to need referral to a specialist in the UK for whatever reason, there's no obvious flagging that's been done. The person then gets to the UK, and I've heard constituents say, well, I went there and they couldn't access my scans. They did another one while I was there, and then they asked me to come back for the scan results, and then they've carried on seeing me for years, and they're very happy to see me. And then I told them about a rash I had, so they referred me to one of their dermatologists while I was over there. It was great service. But of course all of that is being billed to Manx Care. and the Isle of Man government and the Isle of Man people.
And that could be being done, potentially. Some of that, at least, could be done on the island.
Yeah, and so the whole idea was to have proper commissioning so that people were only sent across when they had to go across. Because, again, people I know in Ramsey, particularly elderly people, to go across to Liverpool for a 10-minute consultation to be asked how you are means waking up at 5 in the morning and getting down to get the first plane and then hanging around in Liverpool and then coming back. It's a whole day. If you're doing that with a child, it's a day off work for you and a day off school for your child. And the whole idea with COVID was that we would use more telemedicine, and we'd make it easier for people to get the best care possible, whilst also driving efficiencies. I'm glad to see that the Manx Care are now taking this seriously, but it's something really that should have been done years ago. Now we've got a real emphasis on providing the services that we need within the budget that's allocated.
One of the, we'll stick with this, but I want to come back to one of the difficult areas that you claimed government had taken, which was the rise in income tax. But we'll carry on with this. I mean, telemedicine is something that's been talked about. I mean, I remember us talking about this when I was Member for Health in 2004. So it's 21 years ago we've been talking about how we can improve and how we can get better with all of this. The Isle of Man was supposed to be the lead in the British Irish Council on telemedicine. How are we still talking about it? How come these things aren't commissioned and in place and working by now?
I think there's a range of reasons for that, and I'd suggest you maybe talk to some of the consultants involved in that. Telemedicine has significantly changed how certain aspects at Nobles work, and I'm concentrating on Nobles for the time being. They're multidisciplinary meetings that they have about cancer care. They're dealing real time with people and specialists in the UK and discussing patients. A lot of GP surgeries are now doing telephone conversations or even video conversations as well as part of the normal routine, and that's become fairly standard. I think key to this though is proper management. It's if necessary, doctors here being told, well, no, so-and-so's had their hip operation in Wrightington, they're going to come back and be seen by you. Whether you did the operation or not, you're going to monitor their ongoing care because they're a Manx patient and they should be treated and seen by Manx Care. And so it is looking at the work plans of consultants, of clinics. It is trying to, people have been talking about repatriating patients as if they're held hostage in the UK. It's trying to provide that services locally, and also in this month's Simwell we'll be talking about the two motions about healthcare and healthcare reform and looking at it. It is looking very much at providing proper primary care services, GP services, community services to stop people getting ill in the first place. Okay,
one of the tough decisions you talked about for government was putting up everyone's income tax and not giving them increases in allowances, tax allowances and national insurance allowances. That's not a tough thing for government ultimately. That's a tough thing for the people who end up having to pay, in some cases, substantially more tax. At the same time, a relatively easy decision, and yes, I know it was part of a report to Tynwald in relation to the child benefit increases. That Tynwald supported the principle, but if Tynwald goes round supporting lots and lots of principles that are, quite frankly, unaffordable, surely to goodness your role as Treasury Minister is to say, actually, we can't afford to do this. I mean, I don't know, maybe you can tell me how much the increases in child benefit will cost the Treasury for this year.
Yeah. So the answer to that is the 2.2% increase in child benefit is £297,000. Changing the thresholds is 1.2 million. So put together, that's close to £1.5 million. However, that's part of a range of packages to try to help working families on the Isle of Man. So in the budget, there was another £3 million allocated to the childcare strategy, to getting affordable and accessible childcare for those 3 to 4 year olds and 4 to 5 year olds before they go to school, to again help working families, as well as looking at the tax thresholds and the NI thresholds. Again, difficult decisions need to be made. I think there's every time they are made, some people will see them as cuts, some people will see them as efficiencies, and the devil's in the detail sometimes. Sometimes they are both. I think we have to be honest with the general public and say that we are living outside our means to a degree. We do need to make sure that those services we provide are done in the most economic and efficient way, and target those people who really need them. Now, some of that isn't necessarily about cutting back on aspects of care. Some of it is looking at the eligibility criteria. Some of it is looking at the cost of services and making them cost reflective and increasing charges for things. But at the same time, we need to protect our local economy. We need to protect the money in people's pockets on the Isle of Man, because they drive the economy. It's not governments that creates economic growth. It's the people and the businesses on the island that do that.
But of course, government can create the atmosphere and the environment that allows business to thrive. Do you get lots of thanks and praise for creating said environment, or would you say that most small, medium enterprises on the island are forever knocking at your door asking for things to improve the way in which that they could do business on the island?
As Treasury Minister, I don't get a lot of thanks. I didn't really expect it going into the job. I think, as I said in my budget speech, there is this pervasive negativity about at the moment, not just here, but almost wherever you go in the British Isles, because people are wondering how on earth we've got to the situation where young families can't afford to buy their own home, that everything seems difficult and everything seems a struggle, and there's never quite enough to go round. And that's a combination of some of the economic and demographic changes we've seen over the last decade. You talked about the VAT bombshell that was dropped. We haven't really, although a lot of time and effort has been put into correcting from that time, we haven't really completely, drastically altered the way we provide services. We've refined them, we've got a little bit better, but we haven't dramatically changed those. And at the same time, the cost of living has gone up quite significantly. The tax take from Treasury has remained remarkably constant. We've relied upon growth in people's wages and a slight growth in the population to provide extra revenue. But part of the economic strategy was looking at other ways of raising revenue. So healthcare levy could be one that we're consulting on, looking for capitalising on our territorial waters in terms of offshore wind farms, and the money that will bring in will help. And we've changed some of the taxation policies in terms of corporation tax as well, in line with the OECD. So we've got the minimum 15%.
And there's gas exploration. Is that dead in the water now?
I mean, again, you talk about Tynwald passing resolutions. Tynwald was quite clear at the start of this administration that there should be no new licences granted. There was a licence granted, obviously, previously for exploration for a range of reasons that was never fully taken advantage for in terms of drilling and seismic surveys. I have yet to see anyone else coming forward to say we'd like to explore in your territorial waters, because the rest of the world has changed, and certainly in the United Kingdom now they're not granting new licences. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily dead in the water. I think there's still some interest there. But is anyone going to go in and spend the tens of millions of pounds to basically fund what could just be a speculative venture? Because there's gas down there, but is there enough to get out to make a profit? And we don't know, and nobody will know until somebody puts the money where their mouth is. I don't think that should be government. Personally, and to grant a new licence, we'd have to take that back to Tynwald. But Tynwald can change its mind, and I think one of the other points you made was about Tynwald voting for various changes that have a financial consequence, or voting for various strategies that have quite a lot of financial consequences that can only be calculated after. We need to be quite clear with Tynwald members that everything has a cost, whether it's people's time or money. And we, as a parliament and as a government, need to respect that a lot of the things we do necessarily take money away from taxpayers, or take money from one part of the economy to go to another.
You mentioned the healthcare levy there, and it seems an appropriate time then to move on to that. effectively, this is you put 2% on income tax. You've taken a 1% off. So I mean, when I say 2%, what I really mean is a 10% increase, of course. So the higher rate went to 22. Now it's down to 21, which is 5% reduction, well, give or take. Effectively, though, this healthcare levy that you've suggested, from what my reading of it, appears just to be putting the 2% back onto the higher rate of income tax. So, you're calling it something different, but it's pretty much that's what it is, isn't it?
What I made quite clear in the 2023 budget was that we needed to look at increased government income to fund a growing funding gap with the NHS. We know that the costs of providing drugs, treatments goes up more than inflation. The Department of Health and Social Care and now Manx Care have been consistently overspending, and Tynwald has asked for supplementary votes every year, and since 2019 that's added up to about £100 million. And so we need to plug that gap. What we also need is fundamental reform of the way healthcare is delivered to make it more efficient. The biggest waste in the NHS is actually patients' time. Constantly going from one place to another and going for consultations that are then cancelled and scans, and then people haven't got the results of it when they get back, and really trying to streamline the process to make it much better for the patient. You're quite right that the increase from 20 to 22% was because that year there was an overspend of £30 million, 43 million in total with the other departments, and that needed to be dealt with rather than constantly drawn down from reserves. But I made the pledge at that point to look at other ways of raising that extra revenue, and one of them is for use of long words, a hypothecated health tax. Now, what we've done with the healthcare levy, and the consultation has taken longer to get out than I wanted, but there are reasons for that, is look at the public's attitude for paying more money for an NHS. But at the same time, we need to make sure that our NHS is providing the most efficient care it can within the money it's got. And I actually think that there's a disparity there. Some of my colleagues will say that the problem with our healthcare system is it's underfunded. And if you gave it more money, everything would be all right. My argument to that is I think actually that the amount of resources and extra resources going into healthcare is significant. I think our healthcare system has to be affordable. And if we are going to preserve an NHS as we know it, which I'm absolutely committed to, we need to make sure it gives good value to the people who it provides services to. So we do need to look at those structural reforms. It's interesting that this week we've had the Isle of Man Medical Society coming out and saying, actually, no, don't just throw money at it. Get it working properly. And I think that is absolutely right. And Lord Darcy's report last year, when the Labour government came in, said exactly the same thing. They used the term of blank cheque for the NHS and saying we need to have a better system to provide better care for people. So in terms of a healthcare levy, it is one way of looking at how we can fund the increased cost of our NHS, and it's asking people on the island, one, whether they're prepared to pay more money for it, but also who they think should bear that extra charge. Should the thresholds be more than the personal allowance? So be more people earning more than £14,750 would start paying the healthcare levy. Should it be charged on pension lump sums? Should it be charged even on benefits? And it's been interesting that the range of options I've had. Again, we will be debating this in April Tynwald, and I suspect of the 24 elected members, we'll probably have 24 different answers about how it should be structured and funded and what it should be doing. And that's before we get the Legislative Council involved as well. And I think it's absolutely right that we look at this in more detail, because it is incredibly important for the country.
At one time, that this levy was going to help in relation to solving an ongoing problem, certainly a problem that I've known about certainly all the time I was in politics, and I'm sure long before that, which was how do we make a the situation of people going into residential care fairer, so that people who have saved all their life, maybe they've had the opportunity to do that, but they have saved and they want to gift certain things to their families, they end up in residential care, and the government takes pretty much the lot. The levy, in its initial guise, was supposed to be dealing with things like that, which of course would be an additional expense to government. Is that still being considered, or is that been shoved to a dusty shelf somewhere?
Well, I hate to disagree with you, Phil, but the healthcare levy was always about NHS funding, so it was never about social care. I think you're right, though, because there is a parallel bit of work going on. There's been public consultation last year about funding for residential nursing care and home care, and this want to get to the situation where more people are being cared for at home and not having to go into a home. They can stay in their own home. But who funds that? Because you're right, at the moment, if you're over the threshold for government support through our benefit system, you end up paying the majority of care costs, and that could mean that you end up selling your home to fund them. The numbers of people involved is relatively small, but the impact on those people and their families can be quite significant, particularly when you're dealing with the increasing costs of being in a nursing home. So the Department of Health and Social Care will be coming back with proposals for Tynwald. What they've done in Jersey is have a separate levy for social care, but the once you make something available, the demand can often increase quite significantly. We know carers are doing a huge amount of unpaid work on the Isle of Man, and I thank them very much for that. So we need to be absolutely certain that any scheme we bring in is fair, is equitable, but also affordable for the wider economy, because otherwise we will be looking at increasing taxes more and more, particularly on working people, to fund the care for their mothers and fathers and their grandparents. And we need to get that balance right in terms of ideas like intergenerational fairness if we are to grow the active working population, which comes back to the economic strategy. So it is complex, and I don't think there is an ideal solution, but we will be coming back with various proposals for Tynwald to think about, and I'm hoping we can get some traction on it this time, because this isn't the first time we've talked about this. But we need to address this situation to look after our older people who need that care.
And I suppose then one of the reasons why we've never made progress with something like this is because we always seem to be trying to deal with some kind of economic downturn, or a crisis of the VAT or loss, or the COVID or Ukraine war, whatever it might be. And is there ever going to be a right time to be able to afford, because I guess we're talking many hundreds of millions of pounds of cost associated with this.
I mean, the initial cost of providing a degree of more universality in terms of social care, we estimate in Treasury would probably be about £20 million a year. But that could grow, and we've seen that grow in other jurisdictions, particularly looking at the Jersey model. It started off quite relatively small and then started ballooning because they didn't have the right caveats and restrictions on it. I think you're right in that, unfortunately, government has got to be reactive to the latest crisis, and certainly over the last couple of years there's been too many crises to deal with. I mean, it's been a time of perma-crisis. It's whether it's a childcare crisis or a housing crisis or a cost of living crisis, but they are short-term reactions to events that happen, sometimes out of our control. But it's really important at the same time to have those long-term strategies, which is why I was so keen that we had the economic strategy. We looked forward also in terms of climate change strategies. We're not looking for what we're going to do in the next 2 years. It's the next 10, 20 years, and actually commit ourselves to that and then have the nerve to stick to that. And we've seen in other jurisdictions now trying to wind back from some of those. I think in terms of some of the strategies that we've done in this administration, particularly the economic strategy, is absolutely right that we stick to that investment in the people and the island that we live on. We're looking in terms of the skills strategy, making sure that people have access to education, access to healthcare, and are in a safe, secure environment. which in an otherwise unstable world is actually worth its weight in gold. So that's why more money's been put into our police services, why more money's been put into border security, why we're now looking far more in terms of who comes backwards and forwards on the steam packet and the airlines. And also establishing those routes and making sure that as much as we can, they are affordable and accessible for people.
One of your colleagues in Council of Ministers really did put her neck on the line in relation to a tough decision, and that was in relation to removing the pension triple lock. Said minister made bold pronouncements and said this is the right thing to do if we want to protect the pensions for people in the future. You've been talking about tough decisions. When it actually came to pursuing that tough decision, a U-turn happened, and actually, we'll consider it next year, and we all know next year is just before the budget, so it'll probably then be the year after before it's actually anything happens, because as they say, turkeys don't vote for Christmas, and you'll know as well as I do, pensioners are a substantial voting force when it comes to the elections. Is that, could you not have handled it better to have ensured that tough decision could have been taken?
The tough decision had to be supported, and in last year's budget, I made it quite clear that we needed to move away from triple lock. I talked to you. We had a debate in last October. We went through a couple of different reports from the Treasury.
Members seemed nonplussed about all this. That this had been dropped out of nowhere, which surprised me. So.
Yeah. But again, I think absolutely. I'll if people want to blame me for not communicating that adequately, I take that on. A week before the budget, we had a motion debated that we should keep the triple lock. The majority of members supported that, and I was criticised for not having that public discussion, that public consultation that I pledged to do. At that point, I had to make a judgment call whether to ask officers to stay up all night rewriting the Pink Book, or whether to press ahead with something that was not going to get the support of possibly the majority of members and could derail the entire budget. And so I made the pragmatic decision to back down and do a U-turn, and I apologise to those officers who had to rewrite our budget. But actually it was the right thing to do, because there was so much good stuff in the budget. I didn't want to jeopardise that or create another crisis in terms of a constitutional crisis with us not having a budget. And then there were then some of those people who had voted for changing the budget didn't want the budget to be discussed because they hadn't had enough time to look at the implications. So it's been a bit of a rocky road at the start of this year. What I have done, though, is pledge to come back this month in Tynwald to have a debate about how we fund pensions, our national insurance scheme. Then, on the back of that debate, I'll be listening to what members have said on behalf of their constituents. We'll be going out for public consultation. I'll be hopefully coming on your programme again, explaining what we've known since 2007, really, that the way we upgrade pensions at the moment will outstrip the amount of money going in there. And we've got to make, again, that decision. Do we increase the amount we're taking from businesses and working people to fund pensions? Or do we look at the amount pensions are going up by and try to have those in a more balanced way and in a way that's within our control? Because the triple lock is decided by the UK Chancellor. It's nothing to do with the Isle of Man. And I think it's absolutely right, with all the changes we made in the past to our pension system, that we have control about how it's uprated. And it's uprated in terms of the cost of living on the Isle of Man, not the cost of living in Greater Manchester.
So then, are you going to bring this back to February, Tynwald? Because it does appear that members are nervous. I mean, we're 18 months before the election, they were nervous about making this decision. I guess they're going to be even more nervous when you get to February, Tynwald, next year. Well,
I'm looking forward to a Tynwald debate on this. I'm looking forward to them being able to go out to the public and explain some of the complexities, the fact that we do have a two-tier pension system at the moment, that with some of the changes we brought in to create the Manx state pension, get that away from the UK so we had control over it was the first step, but I think looking at the valuation of that is the next step. And also making sure that our national insurance scheme and our national insurance fund is sustainable and can provide not just for the pensions of today, but the pensions of tomorrow. So I'm hopeful we can at least lay some of the groundwork and get some of those key policy principles right in terms of what's right for our island. Now, whether that comes through next year's budget or whether that comes through the budget after that or the budget after that is up to Tynwald members. But we must have an element of change if we're going to get that long-term sustainability. And again, this comes back to these changes that we sometimes bring in, which aren't just for the here and now and the latest crisis, but looking forward decades in the future and securing the long-term sustainability of our island and its finances.
Public sector pensions was always a big issue which the private sector used to beat government with. It's less so now, but it's still a substantial cost to government, isn't it?
It is, and again, with a reduced headcount or a stable headcount in government, you've got less people paying into it at the same time as you've got pensioners who've contributed sometimes for decades, drawing down a public sector pension. There were significant changes in the last administration, cost-sharing agreements. Some of those recalculations now need to be agreed, and we will be dealing with the PSPA regarding those. But actually, it's managed to constrain what was seen as an ongoing increasing liability. It's running at around about £40 million at the moment, and we've been quite honest about it in the budget. That's paying other people's pensions who were guaranteed a final salary pension. We've created a defined contribution pension scheme as well. That's got less of an uptake, but it is absolutely right as part of the overall government finances that we look at how we deal with our own staff, as well as trying to look at how we deal with people on state pension in the same way as businesses have looked at the way that they deal with their staff.
One of the ways, of course, to grow the economically active part of the population is to bring more people into the island. Another way is to make it more attractive for people to carry on working and get extra benefits by deferring taking their state pension. Is anything like that being looked at by government?
At the moment, one of the aspects that I've been criticised for is that people who work past the state pension age don't pay national insurance contributions, because it's always been seen that those are towards your pension. You're already claiming your pension, you shouldn't be charged twice. I've been asked by Tynwald members to relook at that, and we will be going out for consultation. So that's one of the incentives. One of the issues with deferring state pension age is the way that affects the actuarial projections and makes it a lot less certain in terms of how you'll end up paying for it. I think it's absolutely right that we've got a state pension age, and by then you're allowed to claim your pension, and you'll get it in full. You can then carry on working. If you're unable to work, you get other benefits as well. And we know that state pension age has gradually crept up from 60 now to 67 and theoretically 68 in the future. I am very reluctant to even propose any further extension to that. I think we've gone about as far as we can with the state pension age. By that point, a lot of people are a bit burnt out. They're not able to work as they did when they were in their 20s. Quite understandably, and I think we do need that eligibility to claim the state pension, but we should also be making sure that we have the right support for those people who want to carry on working, work part-time, that we do as much as possible to allow them to do that. And there's been some really good initiatives by firms to take on older people, older workers, train them up, and really appreciate the skills and the wisdom that they can bring to the workforce.
You were, it's fair to say, the recipient of quite a lot of criticism after the budget in 2024. It would appear, in terms of the communication of the budget this time round, that lessons were learned, because I got the feeling, anyway, as one of the people who were presenting, trying to interpret the budget for the public, that we were getting blamed for picking the wrong bits and creating the wrong headlines. A 2% increase in the higher rate of income tax was bound to be the headline. And it did appear as though government wasn't prepared for that. I suppose you'll take some comfort this time round that you appeared, anyway, to be much better prepared this year.
Yes. Again, Treasury always looks at how we can communicate with people better. And it's also communicating to a whole range of different demographics. Coming on your programs is one way of communicating. Putting adverts in the papers for people to read that is another way. Going on social media is another way. Each of us has a different way of getting that information. And some of us will just look at the headlines. Some of us will look in things in a little bit more detail. Following on from the experiences and the justifiable criticism of last year's budget, I spent a lot of time with our communications team, with officers at Treasury, to say, how can we present this as a narrative? And again, this isn't spin, it's just communication. How can we communicate it better? How can we spend...
Because it's very, very complicated, isn't it? And for even people like myself who've spent some years studying Isle of Man government budgets, it's not easy to follow.
No, it isn't, but it's trying to make it easy. But also, I think a lot of people, just when talking about the budget, they want to know, okay, that's fine, and it's close to £1.4 billion now that you're taking and you're spending, but what does that mean to me? What does that actually mean to me and my family or my relatives? How is that going to affect me? And I think a lot of people on the Isle of Man and throughout the British Isles, in some ways, just want to be left alone and get on with their life, and government not to intrude on them and tell them what they can and can't do. Or charge them extra for doing bits and pieces. So what we've tried to do more and more is look at presenting it in a much more personal way for people. That's not dumbing down. All the information's there. You can go onto the website. You can read the entire pink book and all the various tables there. And we've tried to make them more descriptive. But it's just trying to get that message across. Not only what we're doing, but why we're doing it, so that people can understand the reason for some of the decisions we've made. And we will continue to do that going forward. I've been quite keen to see if we can get an online calculator that people can put in their income and see the changes in the tax thresholds or the tax rate, what that actually means to them. And there are ways of doing that, and we will try to bring those in, as well as the presentation of the budget and the explanation beforehand. Additional to that, we've got a Tynwald committee looking at the whole budget process itself and whether that should be changed, and people should be given a lot more time to digest the budget before it's actually laid before Tynwald. And these are things that we will constantly modify and try to get better at doing.
So the other thing I suppose that you got criticised for in last year's budget was that there didn't seem to be a significant government control over public expenditure. A lot of work seems to have gone on subsequent to that. Certainly over the summer, the Chief Minister made various pronouncements about looking to create greater efficiencies. How successful has that been? Because I guess as Treasury Minister, you'll be overseeing a lot of that work.
I am part of a lot of that work, and we lay some of the foundations and some of the accounting for it. In the budget this year, although it's close to 1.4 billion, we've put caps on the amount of extra money going into pay as 2% and non-pay 1%. In reality, that's probably an increased efficiency or cut, which you may say, of £25 million. And that's going to be borne by a lot of departments. We've increased all of their revenues, but we will be looking for them to make efficiency savings. At the same time, we're looking at going for a far more priority-based budget approach and getting some extra resource into looking at those cost pressures in each department. So going forward, that's what Treasury are doing. The Operations and Change Board that was set up by the Chief Minister is looking far widely at a whole range of ways of not just controlling government spending, but in some ways making the delivery of services far more efficient, so we can actually do it in a cheaper way. And that's digitalisation. That's looking at the assets we've got. Do we still need them? It's looking at shared services. It's looking at a lot of things that have been looked at before with the Change programme and the Save programmes that other administrations did. But now we have much more refined technologies. The use of social media, the use of automation, the use of AI as well can streamline things in a way that only a couple of years ago were unimaginable. And I'm hoping those will produce a much better, responsive and affordable public service for the people of the Isle of Man, so that we can balance the books, stop drawing down on reserves in the way we're doing, but also deal with the next crisis that comes around the corner or the next demands that comes from the electorate.
That was Treasury Minister Alex Allinson. So what do you think? Is government getting any better at controlling expenditure? And where do you see the Isle of Man's next big thing for economic success? Is the proposed health levy just a way of disguising a permanent increase in the higher rate of income tax? Let me know your thoughts on the programme by contacting Phil Gaughan at manxradio.com and get in touch if you have any ideas for future shows. Don't forget this programme is available as a podcast on Manx Radio's website. I'm Phil Gaughan. Go to Thanks for listening.